Okay, good morning and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Falani. Hope you had a great weekend. So kicking off the week, very little can be much more important than security. Okay, perhaps the economy, but then even though the economy, economy goes hand in hand. But it was cheering news last week, and we spoke about this before, but we want to get as many perspectives as we can on it. The fact that state governments and the federal government would appear to be in agreement on the question, the age-old question of state police, to be or not to be. Well, the indications are that, indeed, the federal government is favorably disposed, as are the state governments. But does that mean we have state police immediately? Let's look at that, and let's look at the impact that state police can have on our situation. Our guest this morning remotely is Dr. Kabir Adamu. He's CEO of Beacon Consulting. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me here once again.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on. And Dr. Tony Ofeyaton in studio, DG International Institute of Professional Security. A fine morning to you both, gentlemen.
Good morning, Uncle Yori, and good morning, Nigerians.
A good morning to you, sir. Now, cheering news. You are among those I can remember. It's not today. It's been years we've been talking about this. But the day has come. Is it Uhuru?
Well, not yet Uhuru. Not yet Uhuru. But I must say I'm excited.
Okay.
I'm excited because that the government is able to understand the necessity of having a state police now. We simply mean that the security architecture of this country is going to be favorably altered. You know,
okay.
Basically bringing security closer to the people, which helps implementation at the end of the day. That is without prejudice to whatever hitch, whatever challenges that may be inherent in the issue of establishing state police. But having said so, it goes beyond just the announcement, because the announcement as it is now is just more or less like assuaging the yearning of the people. But having said so,
it's an agreement in principle.
It's an agreement in principle, yes.
Let me, I beg your pardon, sir. I'm going to come right back to you, but let me get Dr. Kabir's, position on this as well. You're also one of those, if I'm not mistaken, even if you haven't said it on a program that I was on, I think I might have watched you or listened to you speaking about it, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Are you, well, Tony said it's not yet Uhuru, but he's excited about the prospect that finally government has nothing negative to say about state police. Why do you think they've come around?
Thank you, Uncle Yori. I mean, the reasons are apparent. Anyone who has taken time to read through the Renewed Hope agenda would have seen that the government was very clear on the fact that it is interested in the decentralization of security. And the creation of a state police is one of the elements of this decentralization. Again, anyone who had had the opportunity to read the Presidential Advisory Council report, PAC report, that too was mentioned there. And in fact, they included in that report that one of the objectives of the 9-point priority agenda of this government would include the harmonization of existing police reforms into a single reform agenda, as it were. And in that document, they did speak about the report by former governor of Kaduna State, Governor El-Rufai. You will recall that a few years back, the APC as a party set up a committee chaired by Governor El-Rufai to look into issues affecting the police. Mm-hmm. And even though that report was never made public, but the general belief is that that report recommended the decentralization of policing. In fact, former Governor El-Rufai has spoken extensively regarding his stance on the need to create state policing. So it was very clear that the administration, as a matter of principle and policy, was interested in the decentralization.
Okay. Now back to you, Dr. Ofeyaton. You were about to go on to, excited as you are, there still is some more work to be done for life to be breathed into the idea.
Yes, you know, like I said, the legal regime of the creation of state policing had to be addressed. It's not just for Mr. President to say or to express the interest, even if it's part of its political agenda. It must go through the National Assembly. Subsequently, state assemblies would have to buy into that. And of course, you also talk about also the funding. Now you look at the modalities also. Modalities will include a lot of things in terms of procurement, in terms of uniform, in terms of arms and ammunition, in terms of training and all those stuff like that, and in terms of sustenance. Now these are issues that must come to the table. But I don't have issue with funding as far as I'm concerned. In as much as some argue that it's expensive, I concede to the fact that it's expensive. But if you look at what is happening in the nation today, 2/3 of the states, if not almost all the states, they have one form or the other of paramilitary establishments. You have the Amotekun, you have the Lagos Safety Corps, you have a Kai, you have a Bebeagu, you have Shokoto Masha, you have the Isba, you know, almost all. Recently, the Zamfara state government established the, Forest Protection Guard or something like that, you know. You have all this already in place and they are paying them salaries.
Yes.
The only difference is that they don't bear arms. And that is just going to be the fundamental difference. In terms of training, training is just a matter of timing and upping up and who is conducting the training on behalf of each and every one of them. So for me, because if you look at the strength, the numerical strength of the Nigerian police today, about 500,000 policing 220 million human beings. It's infeasible. Even when you add the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and the NSCDC together, you know, and you are beginning to talk about 1-point-something million. It's still infeasible. So bringing state police in has a very big complementary advantage. Forget about whether politicians will use them or not. Politicians that know how to use police, whether at federal level or local government, they will still use them. They are using them, if you understand. So the issue is not whether they will use police and the like. It's a police that is greedy that will be used, whether at national level, state level, or the one that will not be used will not be used. Okay. So the issue of using them, to me, is a layman's
it was
excuse.
Overhyped,
yes, yes.
Through the all the time we've been talking about it. Look, Dr. Adamu, where they already have this decentralization, I suppose the US is one, maybe the UK is one. What is your idea about how it would work here? Because there's always been this situation where the Inspector General of Police, he's in charge of every single last policeman in Nigeria. So I know we are theorizing at the moment, they certainly will work out all these kinks, but how might it flow, looking at where such a system or systems are already in place?
So I would like to start by emphasizing that Nigeria is probably perhaps one of the few federal systems that does not have a decentralized policing arrangement.
Okay.
It is a norm all over the world for federal systems to have decentralized security arrangements. And that means you would have a federal policing system, you would have a state policing system, and then you would have local government policing systems. And in some instances, community policing systems. So as an example, university communities can be allowed to have.
Oh, okay. I think it froze up there, but we see this in some places along the lines of which he has spoken about.
Okay,
okay, your audio has come back now. Please continue.
Excellent. So if we decide to go along this line where we allow the states, the local governments, and eventually some communities to practice some aspect of policing, then we would not be doing anything different from what the standard in the world, as it were. Now, with regards to your question, how would it flow? First off, is to determine the jurisdictions of all of these policing functions. So as an example, we could say cyber security issues, terrorism issues, organized crime, and all of that would be the functions of the federal police. But low-level crimes that start from states to local government, that jurisdiction will not be the responsibility for the state and community policing. But of course, there must be synergy between all of the three levels. Even when jurisdictions are clear, there must be some areas where there will be convergence, there will be handshakes, and of course, they will be working towards the same function. And that is why I think what is even more important for us as a country at the moment is to define what we mean by policing, and then to also go back to the Constitution and ask ourselves, what is the mandate of the Nigerian police force? And I say this, a lot of people will be surprised with this statement that I make, but I say it first because I play in the industry and I understand that there is a challenge. We've not separated between policing and then the Nigerian police force. In other words, there are several organizations in Nigeria that are carrying out policing functions, but that are not under the Nigerian police force. Okay. So if we decide to move ahead and decentralize policing, what are we going to do with those organizations? I'll quickly mention some of them. Road safety as an example. In most parts of the world, it is a policing function. To an extent, the civil defense, as it is in Nigeria today, not what it was envisaged to be. It's carrying out policing functions. To an extent, the immigration, because in some countries like Germany, it's the police that carries out immigration rules, most of the immigration rules. So we need to start by defining what we want to achieve in the policing function, and then ask that critical question. The current structure, where some of these organizations are under the Ministry of Interior, others are under the presidency. The anti-corruption bodies that were created out of the police, they're under the presidency. So you have three mandate ministries, as it were, if you allow me to add the ministry, the presidency as a ministry, that have oversight and responsibility for policing functions currently in Nigeria. So first, define what we want to achieve, and then see how we can translate that into state policing. Otherwise, it's going to be a convoluted structure like we have at the moment, but it's going to leave us with that gap where you and I feel under-policed.
Indeed. Now, two things, Dr. Ofoyeto. Many of us have, seen operations in America, for example, even if it is in creative films where police might have been chasing some felons, and as soon as they cross the state line, they have to stop because you hear the jurisdiction doesn't extend into that. But Dr. Adamo was speaking about handshakes and technology and all of that. So, and then, of course, combined with training, I can see how all of that might work, and I'm beginning to get an idea of, indeed how this could work. Look at that particular aspect of it. And also, if you like, tag on, and I'll bring this to Dr. Adamo as well, tag on the whole issue of the judiciary. In other places, like in America, for instance, we have the Supreme Court of one state. We have just one Supreme Court. Some offenses are federal offenses, as Dr. Adamo has pointed out. All of that still needs to be worked out. So there's going to be another sit down, right? Think tank as to how all of this shall work.
Well, it's not going to be something difficult because as we speak presently, we practice a federal system of government. It will interest you that each state has its own laws, set of laws. And but even at that, there are offenses that are federal offenses,
exactly,
which are also under the Federal Act. It's either the Criminal Act or the Criminal Procedure Code, depending on whichever, whether north or south. Now, the same thing, you have some laws that are domesticated within a state, Lagos state laws, you have Ogun state laws and all those stuff like that. Now, where in most cases you hardly see such conflict, and when there is conflict, the court is in position to give interpretation. But you will see that the schedule of the Constitution has been able to identify which of these roles are to be played by the state government, the local government, and of course the federal government. The same thing is applicable here. Now, at the level of legal drafting, like he rightly said, first thing is to identify, responsibilities and jurisdiction. Once those have been identified, who plays what role? I can assure you, for example, that the issue of arms is going to be strictly, controlled. When you talk about the territorial integrity of the nation called Nigeria, it's going to be under the federal policing system, for example. you know. But when you are talking of things that had to do like maybe stealing, robbery, burglaries, and the like, it's going to be domesticated within the state or the local government.
But there will still be a federal policing presence in every country. In every state.
Yes. Apart from that, there are special forces. There are special forces that would be interstates, that will cut across all states. Like you have the FBI, you have the CIA, and the like. They don't have jurisdiction in America.
Yes.
The M6, the MI-15, MI-16, and so they don't have jurisdiction. The intelligence world don't have jurisdiction. Israeli Mossad and the like. They don't have anything called jurisdiction. You understand? So if the same thing is going to be applicable, it's just a matter of, first, it has been agreed in principle. The others are not going to be something that is going to be rocket science. Okay. Once we have agreed, jurisdiction is something that is not going to be very difficult to be able to identify. Identify the offenses, put them, there are misdemeanor, there are felonies, and of course there are grievous offenses and all those stuff like that. You know which one to stay. If there are electoral issues, you know electoral issues, if it's not at the national level, it's going to be at the state level. That's what we even still practice as we speak today. So the same thing is going to be applicable to the policing system. Okay. Because the police is only expected to implement, do what? To ensure that peace is applicable in every state based on the law of that state. So what they are doing is more or less like, implementing the law as it were, ensuring that the laws are complied with. That's what they are doing. So it is where they are employed, their jurisdiction, they will implement and ensure that the laws are obeyed there.
Okay. Dr. Adamu, did you want to add to that as a concept, or that's pretty much the way it is?
Okay, yes. I don't want us to leave here without acknowledging a major challenge, and that is democracy at the state level. If there is any challenge, and I've tried to harness the opposition that has been mentioned against the creation of state police, and most of those who are critics who are against it rally around this idea that governors will hijack the process. It's another way of saying that they are not confident that the democratic tenets at the state level is capable of checking the excesses of the governors. Those who say this argue that at the moment, governors are emperors in their states, and that they already have under their control the legislature at the state level, and to an extent the judiciary. And so if you add the instrument of the use of force to that resource that they already have at their disposal, then that means their position as emperors will be solidified, and the civil space, the civic space, will be completely either eroded or muffled to the point where oppositions cannot exist. Now that may be true, but I don't think it should stop us from continuing with this conversation. In other words, and I've spoken extensively with other criminologists, we can come up with a checklist, and that checklist would be like the compliance measure that we can use to say, okay, any state that is able to meet this criteria can be issued a license to proceed. As an example, I can tell you from where I stand that Lagos State is almost advanced, and if that checklist is done transparently, Lagos State would most likely qualify. So Lagos can become a model for the advancement of this conversation. It has in place processes and procedures to a larger extent to limit or check the excesses of what the governor, as an example, would do. But that's not to say that even in Lagos, for instance, we need to advance the democratic tenets. Now, that's number one. Number two is who decides who will be the determinant, for instance, of appointing, if we advance this, the commissioner of police. That's also a very gray area that needs to be critically thought through. It cannot be the governor. It has to be a neutral body that, to a larger extent, is not under the control of the governor. Now, the second argument that has also been advanced against state policing is people would say, for instance, that the federal level is also controlling the police at the moment. But I think those who say this should also appreciate that the checks and balances at the federal level is more advanced than the checks and balances at the state level. Okay. And so if we replicate this and advance it, then it would reduce the challenges that we may encounter if we advance it forward.
An interesting point Dr. Adamu brought up then, the issue of the commissioners of police. I think in other countries, are these offices elective offices where people present themselves to society, or how might it go? Because he was saying that, look, it would be unsatisfactory for the governor to be the appointing authority, and that it should be a neutral body.
I think normally, even in the present formation, if we had done it properly, so to say, it's supposed to even be what I think should be the responsibility of maybe an agency like the Police Service Commission. That's what I believe should have. But in some other climes, it will shock you to know that some other clients, campaigns are done for police chiefs. It's not a strong democratic norm to say that the governor becomes the alpha and the omega in terms of the employment of a police chief. Because if you have the power to hire, you definitely will have the power to fire. Now, but my main concern is not that power to hire, but my main concern is the power to fire. Because the power to fire is the main power. If we have a situation where even if you are a sitting governor for any reason, you want somebody that you can work with, it should be such that the process of removing that person should be more cumbersome and more difficult. To the extent that if that person wants to stand on his value, he would have that assurance that even though you were the person that recommended me, for you to also recommend me for removal should be a tall order. Like the judges. The governors have some level of input in the appointment of judges. But look at their remover. Their remover is a tall order. A governor cannot come and say, I want this judge to be removed.
No.
It doesn't work like that. But the governor has a very high input in terms of the appointment of a judge.
Okay. I got to go on a break now. It's an interesting conversation, and we'll see how all of this will work out. But the one thing is that we've been expecting this for a long time. How long do you think will be an acceptable length of time for it to actually come into being? There are people who are saying that it should have been in existence last week. Last week. So we'll look at that when we come back. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back.